It began with the sound of crying. Not the kind you could ignore, not the soft kind that fades into background noise, but a cry that cuts straight through the air like a wound. The kind that makes strangers turn, even in a city where people don't stop for anything anymore. It was almost midnight at the old Chicago train station. The rain had just ended, leaving puddles on the tiled floor that reflected the flickering neon lights. Everything looked tired, the walls, the benches, the people waiting for the last trains. And right in the middle of it all stood a little girl in a pink coat, holding a torn teddy bear with one missing eye. Her cheeks were wet, her small hands shaking. She couldn't have been more than 7. A few feet away, on a bench that smelled of rust and rain, sat a woman, black, mid-40s, wrapped in a coat too thin for the November cold. Her name was Evelyn, though no one cared to know it. She sat there almost invisible, her hands tucked under her arms, her breath rising in small clouds. She had learned how to disappear in public. People passed right by her like she was part of the furniture. Until that cry. It pulled her back into the world. Evelyn lifted her head slowly. The girl's sobs echoed off the metal pillars. "Are you lost, baby?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both warmth and fear. The girl turned toward her, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Mommy's gone. I can't find her." For a second, Evelyn froze. That word, mommy, stabbed through her like a blade. It had been years since anyone called her that. She hesitated. She knew exactly how people saw her. A black woman with rough hands, worn clothes, sitting alone at midnight in a station. The kind of woman people crossed the street to avoid. The kind no one trusted around their children. But as she looked at that trembling little girl, every wall she had built around her heart began to crack. She moved slowly, careful not to scare her. "It's okay, baby. We'll find her." The girl sniffled, holding her bear tight. Evelyn smiled, a smile that had long forgotten what hope felt like. She reached out her hand. But before the girl could take it, a sharp voice tore through the air. "Step away from the child." A police officer appeared from behind the column, one hand on his belt, eyes filled with suspicion. He looked at Evelyn like she'd just been caught committing a crime. "Sir, please," Evelyn started, but he cut her off. "Ma'am, I said move away." The little girl stepped between them, her voice small but fierce. "She's helping me. Please don't yell at her." But the officer didn't listen. He grabbed the radio on his shoulder, mumbling something about a missing child. Evelyn stood frozen, her hands half raised, her heart pounding. She had been through this before. The judgment, the assumptions, the humiliation. No one saw her kindness. They only saw her skin, her coat, her poverty. And then it happened. The moment that would stop the entire station. The girl, tears still streaming, looked up at the officer, then at Evelyn, and shouted words that made everyone go silent. "You have no home, and I have no mother." For a second, no one breathed. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. The officer blinked, unsure what to say. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, her chest rise with something she couldn't name. Those words, innocent, honest, heartbreaking, cut through all the noise, all the judgment, all the lies the world tells about people like her. The girl's small voice echoed through the station, bouncing off the walls. "You have no home, and I have no mother." It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was connection. Two souls, both lost in their own way, recognizing each other. Evelyn's lips trembled as she whispered, "Baby!" But the officer had already stepped forward, separating them. The girl screamed, trying to hold on. Evelyn didn't resist. She'd learned long ago that fighting only made things worse. Still, her eyes stayed on the child until the very last moment, until the little girl was pulled away, her cries fading into the chaos. People stared. Some shook their heads. Others whispered. But no one helped. Evelyn stood alone under the harsh light, her heart breaking in a way she hadn't felt since the day her own son was taken from her years ago. That day, too, no one had listened. The officer barked something into his radio and led the child away. Evelyn sat back on the bench, the same one she had been invisible on just minutes before. Now everyone could see her, but no one dared to meet her eyes. She could still hear the girl's voice ringing in her head, those 7 words echoing over and over again. "You have no home, and I have no mother." Hours passed. The trains came and went. The crowd thinned until only silence remained. Evelyn stayed there, her coat soaked, her mind spinning. She didn't even know why she cared so much. Maybe because she saw herself in that little girl, abandoned, scared, unseen. Maybe because she had once promised her own child she'd always protect him, and failed. When dawn broke, the city lights dimmed, and the first train of the morning pulled in. Evelyn looked down at her hands, still shaking. They were the hands of a woman life had broken, but hadn't completely destroyed. She whispered to herself, "No home. No mother. Maybe that's why we found each other." Outside, the rain started again, gentle this time. The few commuters walking by didn't notice her whisper. They didn't see the tears she wiped away quickly, pretending it was just rain. But somewhere, deep inside that station, something sacred had happened. Two broken souls had recognized each other in the dark. One had spoken truth the world didn't want to hear. And as Evelyn stood up to leave, the echo of that child's voice followed her out into the street like a heartbeat. It wouldn't let her rest. It wouldn't let her forget. Because sometimes, in a world that looks away, a single moment, one sentence from a child, can change everything. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but that night at the station was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of something neither of them had ever truly known before: home. The night had turned colder by the time the officers separated them. The little girl's cries echoed through the hollow corridors of the Chicago station, bouncing off tiled walls like ghostly echoes that refused to die. "She didn't do anything. Please, don't take her away," she screamed, her small hands reaching out toward Evelyn as the officer pulled her back. But no one listened. Not one of the commuters who had stopped to watch stepped forward. They stood there, whispering, shaking their heads, relieved the situation was under control. Evelyn stood still, rainwater dripping from her hair, her old coat clinging to her shoulders. She didn't resist. She had learned long ago that resistance only made people angrier. Her eyes followed the girl until the child disappeared behind the blue and red lights flashing outside the station doors. The sound of the patrol car's engine faded, but the echo of the girl's sobs stayed, haunting the empty space where they had stood. The officer, his tone clipped and cold, muttered into his radio, "Missing child recovered. Possible abductor questioned and cleared. Homeless, mentally unstable." He didn't even look at her. Evelyn wanted to speak, to say that she was only helping, but her voice refused to come out. She just stared at the puddle beneath her boots, where her reflection shivered with every drop of rain that fell from the station roof. "Thank God the child's safe," a woman nearby murmured. "You never know with these people." Those words, "these people," landed harder than the rain. Evelyn turned and walked out of the station. No one stopped her. No one offered a glance, a word, or even the smallest trace of kindness. Outside, the wind cut through her like knives. She found a spot behind a pillar, pulled her knees to her chest, and sat on the wet pavement. She had nowhere else to go. Her stomach growled, her hands trembled from hunger and cold. But her mind wasn't on her body. It was stuck on that little girl's voice. "You have no home, and I have no mother." Those words wouldn't leave her. They spun inside her like a prayer and a curse at once. Evelyn had once had both, a home and a child. Her son's name was Malik. She used to call him Sunshine, because his smile could melt the darkest mornings. She used to wear scrubs and hold patients' hands, telling them everything would be okay. Back when she was Nurse Evelyn Parker at St. Mary's Hospital, before the layoffs, before the rent hikes, before the world began collapsing piece by piece. When her husband died from a stroke and the bills piled up, she tried to keep going. But grief doesn't just take people, it takes jobs, homes, dignity. She lost her apartment, her car, and eventually, custody of Malik. "Just until you get back on your feet," they had said. But she never did. Now she sat outside a train station at midnight, her breath fogging in the cold, thinking about a child she'd just met, and the one she'd lost years ago. Through the cracked glass of the station doors, she could still see the patrol car parked near the curb. Inside, the little girl sat with her teddy bear pressed against her chest, her face streaked with tears. She looked small, scared, and painfully alone. Evelyn's heart twisted. She could walk away. Pretend it wasn't her problem. That's what the world expected of her anyway. But something deep inside her, something fierce and motherly, refused to let her. Hours passed. The rain eased, replaced by a damp fog that blanketed the city. Evelyn stayed where she was until the car pulled away. When it did, she whispered to the night, "Hold on, baby. Don't let them break you." By morning, Evelyn's clothes were soaked, and her body ached. But she had made a decision. She went to a nearby church, one of the few that still left its doors open for the homeless in the mornings. She warmed her hands by a heater, took a piece of bread from a volunteer, and saved half in her coat pocket. It wasn't much, but it was something. That afternoon, she returned to the train station. The same bench. The same platform. The same smell of oil and rain. She waited, clutching the small paper bag with bread inside. Hours went by. Trains came and went. The crowd changed faces, but the emptiness in her chest stayed the same. Just when she began to think the girl would never come back, she heard noise from the far end of the platform, commotion, voices, and flashing lights again. People gathered near the ticket counters. Evelyn stood slowly, her knees stiff, and walked toward the noise. There she saw her, the same girl, now in different clothes, holding the same teddy bear. She was crying again, surrounded by officers, social workers, and camera crews. "She got lost again," someone said. "Her mom's still missing." Another voice whispered, "They say the mom might have left her on purpose." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Before she could think, before she could stop herself, the little girl's eyes met hers. Recognition flashed instantly. The child broke free from the crowd, running straight toward her. "Evelyn!" she cried, though she had never been told her name. The people around gasped as the girl threw herself into Evelyn's arms. Evelyn froze for a heartbeat, then wrapped her trembling hands around the child, holding her tight. The cameras clicked. The officers shouted. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The little girl buried her face in Evelyn's chest, sobbing, "I knew you'd come back." Evelyn whispered through her tears, "I never left, baby. I never left." The social workers hesitated. They didn't know whether to pull the girl away or let her stay. The officer from last night, yes, the same one, stood there, his face unreadable. The crowd murmured, recording on their phones. A homeless black woman holding a lost white child in the middle of a train station. To some, it looked scandalous. To others, it looked holy. Evelyn didn't care about the whispers. She only cared that the girl had found her way back. The child's small hands clutched at her coat, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt warmth that wasn't from the sun or a heater, it was from love. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the news vans drove off, Evelyn sat with the girl on the same bench where it all began. The girl had fallen asleep, head on her lap, teddy bear resting against her chest. Evelyn looked at her face, peaceful now, and whispered, "Maybe we both needed to be found." The officer stood a few feet away, watching quietly. For once, he didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He just nodded, like he finally understood something that no badge could teach. Outside, the city lights glowed in the fog. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn blew, long and lonely. Evelyn looked up and thought about Malik, her son, somewhere out there in the world, and about this new child who had walked right into her heart. The world had judged her, called her names, labeled her dangerous, unstable, unwanted. But none of that mattered now. Because in a world obsessed with walls, two broken souls had found shelter in each other. And as the station lights flickered and the wind howled outside, Evelyn whispered to the night once more, "You have no mother and I have no home. Maybe together, that means we have both." The headlines came fast. Homeless woman detained for abduction attempt at Chicago train station. Evelyn's face was everywhere, her mugshot, her slumped shoulders, her eyes tired from sleepless nights. The same crowd that had gasped in sympathy hours ago now filled the internet with judgment. Why was a homeless woman near that child? Where was CPS? How did the police let this happen? The world had already chosen a villain before hearing her side. And Evelyn, sitting behind the cold metal bars of a holding cell, could only stare at the cracked concrete floor and whisper the same question to herself again and again. Why does goodness always get mistaken for danger? It was supposed to be simple. The girl, Lily, had run back to her. Evelyn hadn't done anything wrong. She had only held her, comforted her. But the officer had to follow protocol. He called it procedure. Procedure didn't care about tears or truth. So Evelyn waited, one more soul buried beneath a system that never saw her humanity. But fate, as it sometimes does, had its own plan. Because as the hours turned into a day, and the story spread, a nurse named Carla at a downtown hospital saw Evelyn's picture on the morning news. She froze. "No, that's Evelyn Parker," she whispered, dropping her coffee. She remembered the name instantly. The nurse who had worked double shifts during the Southside fire, the one who saved 3 children from the burning pediatric ward before collapsing from smoke inhalation. The city had even given her an award back then. Then, 1 year later, the hospital shut down. Funding cuts. Layoffs. Evelyn had disappeared, swallowed by poverty's silence. Carla made some calls. Soon, reporters picked up the story. Was the homeless woman once a hero nurse? The headlines began to shift tone. The city that had ignored her started remembering. The same people who had thrown disgusted looks her way at the station now filled comment sections with disbelief. How did a woman like her end up on the streets? This country fails its angels. Meanwhile, in the children's shelter across town, Lily refused to eat. She sat by the window, clutching her teddy bear, asking every hour, "Can I see her now?" The social worker sighed each time, saying softly, "Sweetheart, the lady's being questioned." But Lily didn't understand what questioned meant. She only knew that the one person who had held her when she was alone was now locked away for caring. By the second night, the truth began unraveling like a storm. The police traced Lily's background, no emergency contacts, no consistent address. When they finally located her mother, it wasn't what anyone expected. The woman had a long history of addiction and arrests. She admitted to leaving Lily at the train station, saying, "I couldn't do it anymore." The confession hit the news. Reporters flooded the precinct. The narrative flipped in an instant, from homeless woman accused to neglected child saved. When they told Evelyn the charges were dropped, she didn't react at first. She just sat there, quiet, her hands folded. Then, slowly, a tear rolled down her cheek, not from relief, but exhaustion. "I told you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I was only trying to help." The next morning, the world watched as she walked out of the precinct in the same coat she'd been arrested in, head bowed, reporters shouting questions. Microphones, cameras, flashes, it all felt unreal. But then, in the middle of the noise, a small voice cut through. "Evelyn!" It was Lily. She had escaped her social worker's hand and ran straight toward her, her little arms open wide. Evelyn dropped her bag and fell to her knees as Lily collided into her arms. The cameras caught everything. The tears, the trembling, the long hug that felt like 2 hearts remembering how to beat again. A reporter shouted, "Do you have anything to say?" Evelyn lifted her head, eyes glistening. Her voice was soft but carried across the street. "No one is born homeless," she said. "The world just forgets where to look for them." The words spread like wildfire. Within hours, they were all over social media, quoted under her picture, shared by celebrities and strangers alike. "No one is born homeless." The phrase became more than a sentence. It became a mirror, forcing people to look at themselves, at the system, at their silence. That night, Evelyn and Lily were taken to a quiet room in the child welfare office, away from the flashing lights. They sat together on the floor, eating soup from paper cups. Lily leaned her head on Evelyn's shoulder. "You're not going away again, right?" she whispered. Evelyn brushed a curl from her forehead. "Not if I can help it." The next few days were a blur. Churches reached out. A fundraiser started. People sent clothes, food, letters. "You helped a stranger's child," one note read, "but you reminded me to see people again." The same city that had turned its back on her now wanted to lift her up. But Evelyn wasn't thinking about fame. She was thinking about purpose. In the cell, in the rain, in the moment that little girl's voice had echoed through the station, she had seen something divine. A connection that didn't care about color, class, or circumstance. Reporters wanted interviews, but she refused most. The one she agreed to was quiet, intimate. The journalist asked gently, "When that little girl said those words to you, You have no home, and I have no mother. What did you feel? Evelyn took a long pause. Her eyes softened. I felt like God had sent me a reflection. She was what I lost, and I was what she could become. We were both waiting for someone to see us. And that night, we finally did. The video aired the next evening, and millions watched. Some cried. Some called their mothers. Some called their children. Because in Evelyn's cracked voice, people heard something they hadn't in years: truth. Lily was eventually placed with a foster family, but she visited Evelyn often. They'd sit together in the park near the station, feeding pigeons, sharing stories. Lily once asked, "Why did people think you were bad?" Evelyn smiled sadly. "Because sometimes, baby, the world can't tell the difference between danger and pain. And people fear what they don't want to understand." As the months passed, Evelyn became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of redemption. Yet deep down, she never saw herself that way. She was just a woman who refused to look away from a crying child. And while the city buzzed with her story, the real miracle was quiet. It was in Lily's laughter returning. It was in the way strangers now looked at the homeless differently, maybe not with pity, but with recognition. Because once you see humanity in someone the world calls invisible, you can never unsee it again. The winter sun over Chicago had a way of lying. It glowed gold on the rooftops, painting warmth where there was none. But on that morning, for the first time in years, Evelyn Parker didn't mind the cold. She stood outside a modest brick building on the south side, clutching a folded letter in her hands. The paper trembled, not from fear, but disbelief. It was real. The city had granted her a small apartment through a community initiative that had been inspired by her story. They called it the Evelyn Project, a pilot program for reintegrating the homeless into safe housing. As she turned the key, the door creaked open to reveal a single room, bare walls, a tiny kitchenette, a narrow bed. It wasn't much. But to Evelyn, it was sacred ground. She stepped inside slowly, her footsteps echoing softly. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint scent of dust and new beginnings. For a long moment, she stood still, tears filling her eyes. Then she whispered, almost to the walls themselves, "We made it, Lily. We made it." That evening, Lily arrived with her foster mother. She came running down the hallway, her boots tapping like a heartbeat. "Miss Evelyn!" she cried, jumping into her arms. Evelyn laughed through her tears, lifting her off the ground. "Look at you," she said. "You've grown already." Lily grinned. "You have a house now. Does that mean I can come visit all the time?" Evelyn smiled. "As much as your heart wants." They spent that afternoon decorating. Lily drew a picture of the two of them holding hands under a rainbow and taped it to the fridge. Evelyn hung her old nursing pin beside it, a small piece of her past she had never thrown away. As dusk settled, Lily curled up on the couch, her head on Evelyn's lap. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Why didn't you give up when everyone was mean to you?" Evelyn brushed her hair softly. "Because if I did, I would have proven them right. And you, my little one, you were the reason I remembered who I was." Lily smiled, half asleep. "Then I guess we saved each other." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Cars passed, sirens wailed, life moved as it always had, but something had changed. The story of Evelyn and Lily had ignited something across the city. Churches opened their doors to the homeless during winter. Restaurants started pay-it-forward programs where customers could buy meals for strangers. Schools began organizing clothing drives. But what no one saw was the quiet healing happening between two souls who had simply found each other in the chaos. Weeks turned into months. Evelyn began volunteering at the same shelter that once took her in. She didn't just serve food, she listened. To veterans, to single mothers, to kids lost in the system. She remembered every name, every story. People trusted her, not because she had fame, but because she had been them. One rainy evening, as she wiped down the cafeteria tables, the shelter director approached her. "Evelyn, you ever think about coming back to nursing?" She froze, her eyes softening. "I lost my license years ago." The director smiled. "Well, maybe it's time we got it back." And so, at 52, Evelyn Parker enrolled in a recertification program. The same city that once jailed her for caring now paid her tuition. Each morning, she'd wake before dawn, sip black coffee, and whisper a prayer of thanks. Not for miracles, but for second chances. Lily, now thriving with her foster family, visited every weekend. Sometimes they'd bake cookies. Other times they'd just talk. One afternoon, Lily brought her school essay titled The Person I Admire Most. She read aloud, "Some heroes wear uniforms. Some save people in hospitals. Mine saved me at a train station. Her name is Evelyn Parker." She didn't have a house then, but she had the biggest heart in the world. Evelyn couldn't speak. She simply reached out, pulling Lily close, and whispered, "That's the greatest award I'll ever have." Years later, when Evelyn stood once again in a hospital hallway, wearing her nurse's badge, the staff clapped as she started her first shift. But she didn't feel pride, she felt peace. Every beep, every voice, every child's laugh in the ward reminded her why she'd never stopped believing. And though she had her own bed now, she never stopped visiting the streets. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk near the same station where it all began. She'd hand out blankets, soup, a kind word. Once, a man sitting on the steps asked her, "Why are you helping us?" She smiled gently and said, "Because someone once reminded me that home isn't a place, it's the people we refuse to leave behind." By then, the Evelyn Project had expanded to multiple cities. The movement had a slogan printed on every poster and billboard, "No one is born homeless." The phrase that came from her trembling voice that night had become a message of national change. Documentaries were made. Awards were given. But Evelyn stayed humble, always insisting, "It wasn't me. It was love doing its work." On Lily's 10th birthday, they celebrated together. Balloons, candles, laughter filling the little apartment. As the girl blew out her candles, she looked up and asked, "What did you wish for, Miss Evelyn?" Evelyn smiled softly. "That everyone who's lost finds someone who sees them." That night, as the city lights blinked outside and the sound of the train rumbled in the distance, Evelyn sat by her window. She thought about all the years of wandering, of being unseen, unheard. And now, here she was, home. Not because someone gave her charity, but because someone believed her story mattered. When she finally lay down to rest, the wind outside brushed gently against the windowpane, carrying echoes of laughter, prayers, and forgiveness. Somewhere deep within, she felt a stillness she hadn't known in decades. Evelyn Parker had been called many names in her life: nurse, beggar, savior, criminal, hero. But as she drifted to sleep, one word lingered in her heart, soft and certain: